The 6-minute mission that changed special operations forever. Listen to this. You're sitting in a concrete cell, 9 months in solitary confinement, in the most notorious prison in Panama City. The guards have explicit orders. If anyone tries to rescue you, you die. No warning, no hesitation, just a bullet to the head. You know this because they've told you every single day. Your crime, running an underground radio station criticizing a dictator. Your name is Kurt Muse. Codename, Precious Cargo. And outside, in the darkness of December 20th, 1989, 4 helicopters are screaming toward your prison at rooftop level, carrying some of the deadliest operators on the planet. They have 6 minutes to get you out alive. 6 minutes before the entire Panama Defense Force realizes what's happening and converges on your location. This is the story of Operation Acid Gambit, the most audacious hostage rescue ever attempted by Delta Force. And when I tell you how close it came to complete disaster, you won't believe anyone survived. The dictator who betrayed his masters. To understand why Kurt Muse was rotting in that cell, you need to understand Manuel Noriega and the twisted relationship between a dictator and the CIA. Noriega wasn't always America's enemy. For years, he was on the payroll. The CIA valued him as an intelligence asset during the Cold War, feeding them information about communist movements in Central America. He played both sides masterfully, taking money from the CIA while simultaneously allowing drug cartels to use Panama as a transit hub for cocaine flowing into the United States. But by the late 1980s, Noriega had become a liability Washington could no longer tolerate. His Panama Defense Forces were increasingly brutal, crushing political opposition with violence. Election results were openly falsified. Opposition leaders were beaten in the streets by Noriega's Dignity battalions, civilian thugs armed and encouraged by the regime. When Guillermo Endara actually won the 1989 presidential election, Noriega simply annulled it. Images of Endara's bloodied face, beaten by Noriega's men, circulated around the world. Then there were the drug trafficking charges. U.S. prosecutors indicted Noriega in 1988 on counts of cocaine trafficking, racketeering, and money laundering. The man America had paid for intelligence was now facilitating the very drug trade destroying American cities. And then there was the canal. The Panama Canal, one of the most strategically vital waterways on Earth. Under treaties negotiated by President Carter, the United States was scheduled to hand over full control to Panama in 1999. But those treaties assumed a stable democratic Panama. Noriega's increasingly erratic behavior and his flirtations with Cuba and other anti-American regimes made Washington nervous. Very nervous. Tensions escalated throughout 1989. American service members stationed in Panama faced increasing harassment. In October, a coup attempt against Noriega failed when U.S. forces, under restrictive rules of engagement, didn't intervene effectively. President George H.W. Bush faced criticism for the botched opportunity. Then, on December 16, 1989, everything changed. A U.S. Marine Lieutenant, Robert Paz, was killed by Panama Defense Forces at a roadblock. Another American officer and his wife were detained, beaten, and threatened. The wife was sexually assaulted. Bush had his justification. Within 72 hours, he would unleash the largest American military operation since Vietnam. Operation Just Cause was coming. But before 27,000 American troops stormed Panama in a massive simultaneous assault, a tiny team of Delta Force operators had a different mission. A mission so sensitive that if it failed, it could compromise the entire invasion. They had to get Kurt Muse out alive, the American who became Precious Cargo. Kurt Muse didn't look like someone who'd end up at the center of an international crisis. Born in the United States but raised in Panama, he was a businessman who loved the country where he'd grown up. He spoke fluent Spanish, understood Panamanian culture, and had friends across all levels of society. But watching Noriega's regime brutalize Panama ate at him. When Noriega began consolidating power and crushing dissent, Muse and a small group of like-minded Panamanians decided to fight back. Their weapon wasn't guns or bombs, it was information. They created a clandestine radio station designed to interrupt Noriega's propaganda broadcasts. Using technical expertise and equipment, they built transmitters capable of overriding government frequencies. When Noriega's radio stations broadcast his lies, Muse and his team would hijack the signal and broadcast the truth. Reports of corruption, human rights abuses, stolen elections. It was dangerous work, and Muse knew it. But he believed in what he was doing. The operation ran successfully for months. The regime knew someone was hijacking their broadcasts, but couldn't locate the source. Muse and his team moved equipment constantly, stayed mobile, and covered their tracks. Then came the mistake that changed everything. A media outlet reported that the clandestine radio operation had CIA backing. Whether true or exaggerated, the claim gave Noriega's intelligence services the angle they needed. They intensified their hunt, and in April 1989, they finally tracked Muse down. The arrest was swift and brutal. Panama Defense Forces stormed his location, seized him, and threw him into Modelo Prison, a concrete fortress in the heart of Panama City, just blocks from Noriega's headquarters at La Comandancia. Modelo wasn't just any prison. It was where Noriega kept his most valuable prisoners, the ones he wanted total control over. Political dissidents, suspected CIA operatives, people who knew too much. They threw Muse into solitary confinement on the top floor. His cell was a concrete box, no windows except a small opening in the steel door, barely large enough to pass food through. The heat was suffocating. The isolation was crushing. But the worst part was the psychological torture. The guards told him, repeatedly, that he had a death sentence hanging over him. Not an official one. Noriega was too smart for that. But an operational one. The guards had standing orders. If anyone attempted a rescue, execute the prisoner immediately. No hesitation. Just put a bullet in his head and deny everything later. Muse lived with that knowledge every day for 9 months. He didn't know if anyone was even trying to rescue him. He didn't know if anyone remembered he existed. For all he knew, Washington had written him off as a lost cause, too politically complicated to acknowledge. He was wrong. In a classified facility in the United States, some of the most elite soldiers in the world were already planning his rescue, and they were building a perfect replica of his prison to practice storming it. Delta Force gets the call. When Washington decided Kurt Muse was coming home, there was only one unit capable of pulling it off. 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta, Delta Force, created in 1977 by Colonel Charles Beckwith after the disastrous Desert One hostage rescue attempt, showed America's lack of a dedicated counter-terrorism unit. Delta Force is the Army's premier special missions unit. Modeled after the British SAS, Delta operators are selected from the best soldiers in the Army, then put through one of the most grueling selection and training programs in the world. Most candidates fail. Those who make it through become part of an organization that doesn't officially exist. Delta Force operators don't wear uniforms that identify them. They don't seek publicity. They live in the shadows, executing missions the government will never acknowledge. By 1989, Delta had been operational for over a decade, but still carried the shadow of past failures. The Iran hostage crisis, Beirut. They'd had successes too, Grenada, various counter-terrorism operations, but the high-profile failures haunted them. Acid Gambit was a chance to prove what they could do. The mission brief was straightforward but terrifying. Infiltrate the most secure prison in Panama City, extract an American hostage under standing execution orders, and get out before the Panama Defense Forces could respond. Oh, and do it while the largest U.S. military operation in 2 decades was simultaneously kicking off across the country. No pressure. 23 Delta Force operators were assigned to the mission, supported by the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, better known as the Night Stalkers. If Delta Force were the scalpel, the Night Stalkers were the hand that wielded it. Flying MH-6. Little Bird helicopters and MH-60 Blackhawks, Night Stalker pilots were capable of flying in conditions and environments that would terrify conventional aviators. But before anyone could fly anywhere, they needed intelligence. Detailed, actionable intelligence about Modelo Prison's layout, guard rotations, structural weaknesses, the kind of intelligence that's nearly impossible to get from inside a dictatorship's maximum security prison. Then they caught a break. A U.S. Military doctor with authorized access to Panama managed to visit Modelo prison on a humanitarian inspection. While there, he made contact with Muse, and he smuggled something out: architectural details, information about guard patterns, physical descriptions of Muse's cell location. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Back at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, engineers and Delta operators constructed a full-scale mock-up of Modelo Prison's top floor. Every dimension, every door, every corridor. They recreated Muse's cell down to the smallest detail. Then they rehearsed, over and over and over. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, terrifying in its execution. 4 MH-6 Little Birds would insert directly onto the prison rooftop at night. Delta snipers would eliminate sentries. A small assault team would blow Muse's cell door, extract him, and be back in the helicopters within 6 minutes. Simultaneously, an AC-130 gunship would hammer La Comandancia, Noriega's military headquarters, just blocks away, to create chaos and draw attention away from the prison. 6 minutes. That was the window. Any longer, and the Panama Defense Forces would converge on the prison in overwhelming numbers. The Little Birds couldn't carry enough firepower to fight their way out of a sustained battle. Everything depended on speed, surprise, and flawless execution. As December 20th approached, the operators went over the plan one final time. They memorized every detail. They checked and rechecked their equipment: body armor, night vision goggles, breaching charges, weapons loaded and safed. They knew the risks. They knew Muse had a gun pointed at his head 24/7. They knew if anything went wrong, they might be extracting a corpse instead of a living man. But Delta Force doesn't train to fail. On the night of December 19, 1989, as Operation Just Cause prepared to launch across Panama, the Acid Gambit assault team loaded onto their helicopters. Kurt Muse had no idea that in just a few hours, 4 helicopters would land on the roof above his head. 6 minutes of controlled violence. December 20th, 1989. 12:45 a.m. Across Panama, the world was exploding. American aircraft were hitting targets throughout the country. Paratroopers from the 82nd Airborne were dropping onto airfields. Rangers were seizing key installations. The full weight of U.S. military power was crushing down on Panama Defense Forces positions in a synchronized assault designed to overwhelm resistance before it could organize. In the chaos, 4 small helicopters screamed toward Panama City at rooftop level, flying so low their skids nearly brushed the buildings below. Inside one of those helicopters, Kurt Muse lay in his cell, unaware that salvation was seconds away. The explosions outside, which he assumed were a coup attempt or local fighting, actually signaled the beginning of the largest American military operation in years. The prison guards were confused, trying to figure out what was happening outside. Communications were spotty, reports were contradictory, nobody had clear orders. Then they heard it. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors. Close. Very close. The MH-6 Little Birds came in fast, flaring hard as they touched down on Modelo Prison's rooftop. Delta Force snipers were already engaging. Guards who had the misfortune to be in the open dropped instantly, killed before they could raise an alarm. The assault team moved like a machine. Breaching the rooftop access door, they flowed into the prison's top floor. The plan called for a shaped charge to blow open Muse's cell door, a controlled explosion that would breach the door while minimizing risk to the prisoner inside. They placed the charge, initiated it. Nothing. The humidity and atmospheric conditions had degraded the explosive. It didn't detonate. For a moment, the entire mission hung in balance. Every second counted. Outside, the AC-130 was shredding La Comandancia, but that diversion wouldn't last forever. Panama Defense Forces were already responding to the invasion. Soon they'd realize something was happening at Modelo. The team leader made an instant decision: blow the entire door. They placed a larger breaching charge. This one worked. The explosion was catastrophic. The steel door blew inward in a shower of concrete dust and smoke. The concussion was deafening in the enclosed space. Simultaneously, another Delta operator was already moving. He'd rappelled down from the roof to Muse's cell window, a tiny opening the guards used to observe the prisoner. The guard assigned to execute Muse if a rescue was attempted was standing right there. The operator shot him through the window before the guard could react. Inside the cell, Kurt Muse was thrown to the floor by the explosion, disoriented, ears ringing, convinced he was about to die. 9 months of captivity, 9 months of psychological torture about being executed during a rescue attempt, and now it was happening. Figures in body armor materialized through the smoke and dust. Night vision goggles, weapons, moving with absolute precision. One of them grabbed him. "Muse, we're taking you home." They threw body armor over his civilian clothes, slapped a helmet on his head, protective goggles. No time for explanations, no time for questions. "Move, now." Muse moved. They hauled him up through the prison, through corridors filling with smoke and confusion, back to the rooftop where the little birds waited, rotors screaming. The entire assault, from touchdown to extraction, had taken less than 6 minutes. The plan had worked perfectly, right up until it didn't. When everything goes wrong, getting Kurt Muse onto that helicopter was supposed to be the end of the mission. Extract the precious cargo, fly low and fast out of the city, link up with conventional forces, mission accomplished. But the Panama Defense Forces weren't finished. As the MH-6 carrying Muse lifted off from the prison rooftop, ground fire erupted from multiple positions. Noriega's soldiers had overcome their initial confusion and were now pouring fire toward the escaping helicopters. Bullets ripped through the little bird's thin aluminum skin. These helicopters weren't armored. They sacrificed protection for speed and maneuverability. Now that was coming back to haunt them. The pilot fought for control as rounds tore through hydraulic lines and control surfaces. Warning lights blazed across the instrument panel. The helicopter shuddered, yawed violently. They were going down. The pilot managed a controlled crash into a street just blocks from the prison, setting the crippled aircraft down before it turned into an uncontrolled plummet. It was a testament to Night Stalker skill that anyone walked away, but they couldn't stay there. The helicopter was a wreck, sitting exposed in the open. Panama Defense Forces would be converging on their position within minutes. The little bird lurched back into the air, limping, barely controllable. The pilot was flying on pure skill and adrenaline, coaxing the dying machine into the air one more time. It wasn't enough. The helicopter crashed again, this time for good. The landing was harder, more violent. Metal screamed, the airframe buckled. When the dust settled, 5 members of the team were wounded. Kurt Muse was stunned but alive. The helicopter was completely destroyed, rotors bent, fuselage torn apart. They were on the ground, in enemy territory, blocks from one of the most heavily defended positions in Panama City, with wounded operators and a rescued hostage who'd spent the last 9 months in solitary confinement. The mission that had gone perfectly for 6 minutes was now balanced on the edge of total disaster. The longest hour. The team moved fast, hauling wounded operators and Kurt Muse into a nearby building. They established a defensive perimeter, weapons trained on every approach. Outside, Panama City was a war zone. Explosions, gunfire, the roar of aircraft overhead. But none of that mattered if Panama Defense Forces found them first. The radio operator was already working, calling for extraction. But in the chaos of the larger invasion, with multiple operations happening simultaneously across the country, getting immediate support to their position wasn't guaranteed. They were on their own. Kurt Muse, still processing what had just happened, found himself holding a weapon for the first time in 9 months. Delta Force operators were treating wounded teammates while simultaneously maintaining security. These men had just pulled off one of the most audacious rescues in special operations history, and now they were fighting to survive the next hour. Later, Muse would describe the timeline as distorted, stretched. What the operation logs recorded as 6 minutes felt like 15, 20, 30 minutes to him. Time moves differently when you're certain you're about to die. Above them, aircraft were circling, trying to locate the downed team. But in the confusion and darkness, with smoke from dozens of fires obscuring the city, finding one small group of operators in the urban sprawl was nearly impossible. Then came Salvation, a U.S. Army M113 armored personnel carrier from the 5th Infantry Division, guided to their position by infrared signals visible only through night vision equipment from supporting aircraft. The armored vehicle rolled up to their building, and the team loaded wounded operators and Kurt Muse into its protective hull. The M113's armor would stop the small arms fire that had brought down the helicopter. As they pulled away from the crash site, Panama Defense Forces were already closing in. Minutes later, enemy soldiers would reach the building the team had just evacuated. The armored vehicle fought its way through the chaos of Panama City, finally reaching U.S. lines. Kurt Muse was safe. Every member of the assault team survived, though several would spend time recovering from wounds. Operation Acid Gambit was officially a success, the first successful hostage rescue in Delta Force history. The aftermath and what it meant. While Kurt Muse was being extracted from Modelo Prison, Operation Just Cause was crushing Panama Defense Forces' resistance across the country. The simultaneous assaults had achieved complete surprise. Noriega's military was shattered within hours, but Noriega himself had escaped. For weeks he evaded capture, moving between safe houses and supporters. U.S. forces launched psychological operations, including the famous incident where they blasted rock music at the Vatican diplomatic mission where he'd sought refuge, trying to drive him out. On January 3, 1990, Manuel Noriega finally surrendered to U.S. forces. He was transported to Florida, tried on drug trafficking charges, and convicted. The dictator, who'd once been on the CIA payroll, spent the next decades in prison. But Operation Acid Gambit's significance went beyond rescuing one man. It demonstrated capabilities that would define special operations for decades. The integration of intelligence, precision aviation, and elite ground forces to execute a complex mission in an extremely hostile environment. The willingness to take calculated risks to bring Americans home. For Delta Force, it was validation. After the shadows of past failures, they'd executed a mission that would be studied in special operations courses for generations. 6 minutes to breach a heavily guarded prison and extract a hostage under standing execution orders, all while a larger invasion unfolded around them. Kurt Muse returned to the United States as a hero, though he maintained a relatively low profile. He'd later write about his experience, describing the surreal nature of those 9 months in solitary confinement and the shock of his rescue. The operators who saved him moved on to other missions, other wars. Many would deploy to Somalia, Iraq, Afghanistan, conflicts where the lessons of Acid Gambit would be applied again and again. The Night Stalkers continued their reputation as the most skilled helicopter pilots in the world, flying missions that seemed impossible to everyone else. And somewhere in a classified facility, Delta Force continued training for the next impossible mission, the legacy of precious cargo. What makes Operation Acid Gambit significant isn't just that it succeeded, it's that it succeeded despite everything going wrong. The primary breaching charge failed. The extraction helicopter crashed, twice. The team was stranded in enemy territory with wounded operators and a rescued hostage. Any one of those failures could have turned the mission into a catastrophe, but the operators adapted. They improvised. They executed their training under the worst possible conditions and brought everyone home alive. That's what separates truly elite units from everyone else. It's not that they execute perfect missions. It's that when things go wrong, when the plan falls apart and chaos reigns, they're trained and disciplined enough to adapt and complete the mission anyway. Kurt Muse's codename was Precious Cargo because that's how the U.S. government viewed him. An American citizen in danger, worth risking elite operators and sophisticated aircraft to recover. The message was clear: we don't leave our people behind. In the years since, that philosophy has driven countless rescue missions, some successful, some tragic. But the principle remains: American citizens in danger will not be forgotten or abandoned. For the 23 Delta Force operators and the Night Stalker pilots who flew into Modelo Prison that night, Acid Gambit was just another mission. They didn't seek fame or recognition. Most of their names remain classified to this day. That's how they prefer it. But for Kurt Muse, and for every American held hostage in hostile territory since, Operation Acid Gambit represents something profound. The promise that someone is training right now, preparing for the impossible mission, ready to come through fire and chaos to bring you home. 6 minutes of controlled violence that changed special operations forever, and it almost didn't work. Now I want to hear from you. If you were one of those Delta Force operators waiting in that building after the helicopter crash, wounded teammates around you, enemy forces closing in, what would be going through your mind? Drop a comment below and let's talk about what it takes to stay calm when everything falls apart. And if you're fascinated by the incredible capabilities and courage of Special Operations Forces, hit that subscribe button. We've got more stories about the missions that changed military history and the warriors who executed them. Thanks for watching.